Hey everyone, welcome to week 5 of our Good News series. Everyone needs good news. And good news that lasts, not just for a few people and for a little while, but for everyone and for always. It's exactly what we find in Jesus. This week, Romans 7. Here we go. We just believe God meets us right where we are, anywhere that we are. And that's true not just for each of us, but it's true for people around us. And especially those of us who are like pointing our lives in the direction of Jesus. God has strategically placed and called us right where we are, given us unique relationships around us that we get to invite in the direction of Jesus. And the more that we'll be bold, the more we'll take just a few risks, the more we'll just take a few steps, God does awesome stuff. Like my new friend I just met outside yesterday, he's been around just a little bit, helping out around our campus, and he went home and he said, listen, I just been doing this thing along the way, and suddenly his 14-year-old daughter and him are sitting across from the scripture just talking about what they're reading together. Next thing you know, 14-year-old daughter says, hey, I got a few friends. They're like, what are you guys doing? They jump in and they start to look and see and discover just a little bit about who God is, and step by step by step, just by watching people find their way in the direction of Jesus. Kind of like a buddy of mine who was he's not really connected to anybody. He and I weren't super tight, but I'm like, hey, what if you and me started to put a group together? Who do you know? I know a few guys looking for a place to hang and kind of head in a direction together. Why don't you see who you come up with, and I'll do the same. And so we got this group. I think there's 11 of us. We never have 11 at the same time. I think there's 11 or 12 of us. I forget. And it's awesome. I get to sit in this circle where, like, this last time, this guy just to my right, he's hilarious, just absolutely a riot. But in the midst of that humor, just deep insight from looking at what God has said that helped me so much, even while he's in the middle of a huge transition in life and honestly some significant struggle. Just across the circle, a guy who's young, eager, and bold, just going after it is awesome, just brings energy to all of us. There's another guy in the group who's experienced just enough kind of hurt and judgment and like misunderstanding in the midst of connecting with other people that showing up feels really, really risky. But he does, and each time he's just finding his way. God's doing some really cool stuff. Or this dad across the way who's like, listen, I'm just glad to be away from work, and honestly my family just a little bit for a couple hours, right? I love it, just honesty in the group. And then another who's just kind of recovering this depth and conviction and calling on his life that maybe in the midst of the scurry and the striving, the achieving and the success just kind of got lost along the way. It just reminds me that in every possible way, good news is relational. Like, good news travels from person to person, and good news is best experienced and enjoyed alongside other people. Like, when we want to celebrate something in life, the first thing we want to do is tell somebody, or we tell the internet so we can tell as many somebodies as possible all at one time. Good news is relational. And we've been saying this for the whole series, that it is relational in that we get to share it with other people. It's especially relational in that it's not some list of rules or some transaction between some distant God and us, but it's a deeply relational day by day interaction with a God who made us, loves us, and will walk us through all that we are facing. But what we're finding, Leslie's finding, what we're finding in our group, what Hugh and his family are finding is this, that it's also best discovered and understood in the context of relationship. And so if you haven't taken the risk, if you haven't just made the leap to invite at least one person to sit down and look at what God is saying and inviting us to together, I just want to encourage you again and again and again. You can find everything you need is so simple just to try and take a step along the way. In fact, we even have gatherings called coaching gatherings between our two services on Sunday from 10:15 to 11:15, where you can sit with some other people and just experience a little bit about what we're talking about and give you the boldness and the tools to step out and do that with your people. But the worst case scenario, you've connected with some great people, you've connected with God, and you find your way along the way. We just know that we all do this better together alongside others in relationship. It's kind of like the conversation I had the first week with this group of guys. We sat down and we looked at a very classic passage. Many of you who have been around church at all, even if you haven't been around church, you probably have heard this story. Anybody heard of the prodigal son? Show of hands. Anyone ever? Right? This is like, I think it was Dickinson who said it's like the most famous short story in the history of the world. Right? We all know this story. But even in the midst of having taught that a number of times, read it, I don't even know how many times, There was so much cool insight in the midst of this. As they retold this story, each of the guys retold the story to practice so they'd have a chance to do it through the course of their week. They were telling the story. There's these two sons, right? In the context, it's this, that Jesus finds himself surrounded by two very different groups of people. He's sitting down with tax collectors and sinners, which were the riffraff of his time. And at the same time, there were these religious elite who thought they had it all together, thought they had all the answers, they did all the right things, looked all the right ways. They were totally the religious elite. And then over here, total ragtags. Jesus is hanging with these guys, and the religious elite are like, what are you doing with those people? And Jesus, instead of arguing with them, he tells a story. And the story goes like this. A father has two sons. One of the sons takes everything he was owed at the death of the father, says, listen, I want all my inheritance now. He runs and he blows it all. While the older son stays home, compliant, obedient, doing all that he's expected to do. But what you find over the course of the story is that both of these sons were equally lost in opposite directions. One lost in rebellion, and one still lost in compliance. Neither one of them experiencing relationship with the Father, which is all the Father really wanted. Life deeply with his sons as they emerge and develop. This is what God has in mind for us, and this is actually a lot of what God has to say in Romans 7. We've been going through this letter in the book of Romans, and we're in Romans chapter 7. So if you have a Bible, I want to encourage you to go there. If you don't have a Bible, you can download an app super quick, very free, very easy to use. In Romans chapter 7, we actually find like an extended version of this same situation. Rebellious people who have never done what God wanted and didn't even care about it for most of their life. Maybe some can relate. And this other group of people who've been always trying to do all the right religious stuff all along the way. One in the book of Romans will be known as Gentiles, the other known as Jews. And in the middle of this, Paul writes a letter and says, what are we going to do about this? These people don't know any of the rules and don't follow them. These people know all the rules, but newsflash, they don't follow them either. Right? They may be different in what they know, but they were not different in practice. And so here's how we're going to look at this today in Romans 7. I'm going to give you 3 rounds of good news, and I want to encourage you to send a text every time one pops up. Okay? Send a text at least to yourself. Or if someone else pops in mind for this kind of news that needs this kind of good news, send them the text with no explanation. It'll be great. They'll send you a text back that's like, is this for me? Like, yep, I'll tell you later, okay? Right, so listen, 3 rounds of good news along the way. Like I said, the big question is these 2 groups of people. People who didn't know anything about what God wanted and didn't do it, and people who knew all about God and they pretended to do it. They acted like they knew what they were doing. They definitely put on airs and filters and polish and all kinds of stuff that made them look really, really good. But the truth was, just like the 2 sons in the story, they were both disconnected from God. They were missing the point. All right, because here's the truth. Whether it was the younger son or the older son, whether it's the Gentiles or the Jews, the problem that we are all experiencing is in everyone, not just in everyone else. We're just a group of people around here who recognize we don't have it all together, right? This is part of what makes us followers of Jesus. At some point, we realized what we brought wasn't enough. Not enough to be the kind of parent, friend, neighbor, coworker, just confident within ourselves along the way that we needed more than what we brought. And good news, Jesus is it. All right, so here's how we're going to look at this. If the problem is in everyone, not just in everyone else, then this is actually, doesn't sound like good news, but this is good news. The struggle is real. Can I get a head nod that the struggle is real? Right? Every single one of us finds ourselves in the midst of this. Doesn't that sound awesome? The struggle is real. You're going to find somebody, you may even think of somebody right now who needs to hear you say, because they need to know they're not alone. They need to know they're not the only one, that the struggle is real. It's good news because we find out we're not the only one. When someone opens up along the way who look like they had it all together and you see just beyond the veneer that we all walk around with, and you're like, oh, you're human too. That's so awesome. I thought I was the only train wreck in the room. No, we're all train wrecks. We've all found our way into struggle, right? And I love this, that in the scripture, the guy who wrote this, like think about that. The guy who wrote half of the New Testament of the Bible gets brutally honest here in Romans chapter 7. Some of the most relatable passages in the whole Bible for me, honestly, are in Romans chapter 7. Here's one of them. In chapter 7, verse 14, it says this, the trouble is with me, for I am all too human, a slave to sin. Now, pause for just a second. Some of you may have found your way in and are like, oh, here it comes. Here's that shaming, judgment, finger wagging that churches love to do. Not at all. Sin simply means to miss the mark. It means to come up short. Sin is this thing that causes any death and destruction to the good of our lives, whether it's relationships, identity, productivity, all the things. Sin is just what wrecks that. And God is not looking in shame on us. He's looking in compassion and steps into that. You'll see that as we go along. So while sin is a very churchy word, it simply means to come up short, to miss the mark. Every single one of us knows we have this issue in our lives because we can see better for ourselves, and it often just feels a little bit out of reach. In fact, this is why I find Romans 7 so relatable. Verse 15, see if you can relate to this. I don't really understand myself. For what I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Can I get a head nod? Anyone? Instead, I do what I hate. Have you ever walked into a conversation with all the best intentions and imagination and you're walking away like, what just happened? Why did I say that? Or you go into a conversation or a decision-making thing and you look back on what you decided and you're like, I honestly have no idea what I was thinking. That's literally the opposite of what I would have thought I would have done. Right? Like it's like trying to play basketball in your 30s. You find that you're just not 20 anymore, and you imagine yourself 2 steps ahead, but you're actually over here. You're like, dang it, I'm that guy. There's a gap between what we desire and dream for ourselves and what actually comes about. Right? He says it again in a really honest way in verse, I think it's 23. Nope, wait for it. I totally lost my color. 18, here we go. I want to do what is right, but I can't. Anybody relate? I'd love to stop scrolling social media and feeling terrible about myself, but it honestly feels like I can't. I want to stop drinking just a little bit too much, or I'd love to go to sleep without having to have a wind down in the end of the evening, but it just feels like I can't. I would love to speak kindly to my kids when they're total idiots, but sorry. You know, let's just be honest. When you've said something for the millionth time, man, sorry, I was about to turn into therapy, I won't do it. But honestly, is that true to your experience? You desire something for yourself, but it's not even just that you don't. At times it feels like, honestly, I just can't. He goes on, he says, I want to do what is good. I see what is good, but I don't do it. And I don't want to do what is wrong. I don't want to lose my temper. I don't want to come up short. I don't want to be dialed in and focused. I'd rather be friendly. I want to be generous, but I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. Can somebody just give me a head nod that's like, listen, the struggle is real. Everybody? So at least we're not alone in it. Maybe that's not great news. You're like, okay, we're all terrible. This feels great. No. There's a popular version of the way this is said. I really appreciate the way that Brad Meltzer says it. I don't know who that is, but I looked him up, and this is what he says. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So be kind. Always. We forget that, don't we? We show up and we receive the lousy end of their struggle in terms of grumpiness, unkindness, or other things, and then we're just totally ticked, and then we respond in non-kindness, right? But listen, we know that person is fighting a battle that we know nothing about. You know how we know that? Because we are, and they don't know anything about it. And on those days where we show up poorly, we're so frustrated just even within ourselves. The struggle is so real. While we may not know the specifics of their battle, honestly, while I appreciate the empathy that is invited in this statement, we actually know a lot about their battle. We don't know about the specifics of it, but we know exactly what the experience is because all of us are in it. The older brother, I imagine him, while his younger brother had walked off with the inheritance and now he's left with more work and less inheritance, has got to be imagining this young kid out having the time of his life with no obligation, no burden, none of that. He's just imagining how good it must be for the younger son, not realizing that the younger son has run out of money, all his pseudo-friends have left, and he's face down among animals that would offend him. No idea. The younger son must be face down in pig slop, looking back, imagining at home how comfortable, how provided for, how easy. Even though, yeah, there's some work, but it's just, you still have dad, you still have the house. Older son, you must have it all together. Not realizing that all along the older son is lost in bitterness and earning, missing out on the depth of relationship that the father had always imagined. And just to go one step farther, because we're all already uncomfortable, I might as well. Even when we try to focus in on one of the struggles of our life, we just find another one popping up. Right? I got a financial struggle. I got to dial in, and all of a sudden family stuff starts falling apart. Whoa, got to lean in on family. Now the work-life balance is all out of whack and boss is frustrated. Oh, I got this, man, I just feel out of shape and lack of energy. I got to do some self-care. Okay, well, if I do that, now what's going to give up? And so we just find ourselves running around this dam with 1,000 leaks in it and not enough fingers. Anybody with me? The struggle is real. The struggle is real. But I have some good news, right? Good news. Send yourself a text so you don't forget. Good news, the struggle is real. Send it to anybody else. But good news, it's not just you, right? It's not just you, and I mean this actually in two ways. Not just that we're not alone in it, but that we didn't get into it by ourselves. Paul says some tricky things in Romans chapter 7. You should read the whole thing because he is actually genius. You could read Romans like 100 times and find another layer still. What God inspired Paul to write as this epic, almost like lawyer-like legal explanation and defense of what Jesus had done and why it matters in our lives. Romans 7 is one of the thickest parts of it. But one of the things that he says along the way is not just that we're not alone and that all of us have messed up, but that we were not alone when we messed up. That sense of something working against us is radically true. That there is something, the Bible says there is something beyond us trying to trip us up. There is something beyond us luring us right to the edge, hoping that we lose our balance right there so we can be shamed and judged by others and shame and judge ourselves. Brings us right up to the brink and makes it look so enticing and so good until it's not. Right? This is what Paul says. In fact, he uses this word I defined earlier, sin, and he personifies it for just a moment. In Romans chapter 7, verse 11, he says this. He says, sin took advantage of those commands and deceived me. You see, all these people who had followed God and knew all of the kind of rules and expectations and code of conduct, which is good, and this is his argument in Romans 7, all of that is good. It's not bad in and of itself. But what it does, it doesn't make us good, it just reveals that we struggle. The rule itself points to the fact that we broke it. The rule itself actually invites us right to the edge, like the speed limit. I know all of you go the speed limit or below because it's the limit, right? No, it baits us right to the edge. He says, and listen, there is this force at work that is beyond us. And it takes advantage of those commands and tricks us. It's a brilliant explanation that he goes through. You really have to read it and spend some time on it. But it says this, the rule itself kind of makes you aware that there's a line. And what does everybody, some people more than others, want to do when there's a line? Cross it. There's something really exciting about crossing it, right? Especially if you get away with it for a few times. Right? You get away with it like, this is great. This is so fun. I can get this far across the line, and then I can get this far across the line, and then we can get this far across the line, and then all of a sudden, it bites you. How many of you can resonate with that experience? Listen, we've been there. We've been there. This much credit card debt. It's probably fine. I know debt's not wise, but listen, it's just this much, and it really hasn't grown that much over the last couple of months. It'd be fine. I can have this before I can afford it, right? Or you know what? I can consume this much, and it seems to be fine, whether it's coping with food, alcohol, or anything else. Or I can experiment with this thing, and I didn't experience the consequences. It looks so good. In fact, we live in a culture that just kind of rewards that kind of bravery, that kind of recklessness along the way cheers us. Andy Stanley says it this way: we need to live with guardrails because what culture actually does with us is it lures us right up to the edge, and whoever lives closest to the edge as successfully as possible, they're the heroes. But the moment you trip up and fall over the edge, everyone's ready to cut you out and shame you. That's true. I found that to be true over and over and over. In fact, in 7:13, Paul says it this way. It says, sin used what was good, which was God's expectation, to bring about my condemnation to death. So we can see how terrible sin really is. It uses God's good commands for its own evil purposes. That sense of you want to do what is right, but you can't, there's a reason. There are things beyond us. There is something beyond us. And some of that is beyond us is literally working against us. In fact, Paul would say it in another letter this way. He says, we are not fighting against flesh and blood, enemies, but against evil rulers, authorities of the unseen world, and against mighty powers in this dark world, against evil spirits in heavenly places. We don't often talk a lot about this, and we honestly don't like to. We love to talk about what God is up to for our good, and He is bigger, and He is stronger, and it is good. We love to think about that part of beyond, but there is also a beyond working against us. And if we find ourselves trying to move forward without a strong help, we're not going to make it very far. In fact, this last week we were talking about that in our discovery study with these guys. There's another story of Jesus where some friends had a friend who was unable to walk. They try to bring him to Jesus. They can't get through, and so they dig a hole through the roof. Some of you will remember this story. They lower the friend through the roof, right in front of Jesus, right in front of this whole crowd. And the first thing Jesus says is not get up and walk. Do you know what it was, those of you who've been in the study? He says, I forgive your sins. Jesus always and first cares about our spiritual connection to Him. And then that, yes, always has implications on all the other aspects of our life. There is an enemy, and Jesus wants to win. Those of us who fight that enemy alone always, eventually lose. There is something beyond us. In fact, Jesus said it this way: the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. This is why we speak so harshly against sin, not to shame people, because it is vicious. That when we go in the opposite direction of God, who is truth, and we tell lies, it kills relationship. That's what sin does. It kills stuff. Not just death eventually, death now. That when we start telling lies about our own self-worth, or we start to believe that our self-worth is determined by a bank account or achievement or the way people respond to us or respond on the internet, we have told lies to ourselves, and it destroys our identity. So the next time that doesn't come through, we think less of ourselves, and it wrecks our own confidence and ability to live into the calling that God has for us. Sin wrecks stuff. It kills stuff. We have an enemy going after bad for us. But Jesus says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. What Jesus does is not always make everything right around us, but makes everything right within us and between us, and enters the mess and goes with us. So I just want you to know, this is so true. There is something beyond you working against you. It's why all of us can nod our head at those relatable phrases. Paul says it this way in 7:23. He says, there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. I love how honest he is. What a miserable person I am. Not a self-judgment, but just like, oh, this is awful. I hate this. No one was glad to nod their head earlier at how much we can relate it, how the struggle is real. He says, who will free me? Who could free me? I can't get out. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? And he says, thank God. Thank God, thank God. The answer is in Jesus Christ, our Lord. So good news. There is someone beyond you working against you. But good news, there is someone beyond you, way stronger, working for you. So while it is good news that the struggle is real, we're not alone. We're not the only ones. We're not just that failure. And the good news, it's not just us. Not only are we in it together, but there's something working against us. It's not just us leading to our own failures. But here's good news. The solution, if the problem is an enemy working against us, the solution is a friend. We've been saying this over and over and over. The solution is friendship with Jesus. In fact, Paul goes on to say this. He says it, I think in verse 4 in chapter 7, he says, "My dear brothers and sisters, this is the point. You died to the power of the law when you died with Christ." Now, we're going to talk about how we died with Christ next week. So important. Romans chapter 6, can't miss it. It's why we celebrate baptism so deeply, a picture of death, burial, and resurrection. Because anything that would separate us from God has been paid for in Jesus. That there is nothing interrupting our friendship with God because of what Jesus did for us. While yes, our sin is offensive to God, and while yes, we have failed and come up short, because of what Jesus did, and because he rescued that, anything that would separate us from God has been paid for in full. And so now he says, you are united with the one who was raised from the dead. And so he says this. He says, as a result, we can produce a harvest of good deeds for God. That struggle that Paul talks about, that we began with, such relatable statements. I want to do good, but I don't. I try to do the best, but I can't. And what I don't want to do, I end up doing. He says, listen, that doesn't have to be true anymore. When we are friends with Jesus, when he steps in, the enemy that works against us has no space in our lives. And now Jesus, who is stronger, carries us forward. And now we can actually produce good with our lives. Our identity can thrive. Our purpose and calling can be discovered. Good can come out of us into others. We become bearers of good news instead of purveyors of all the bad that everyone else seems to be spreading around us. We can produce good deeds for God. He says, when we used to be controlled by our old nature, sinful desires were at work at us, and the law aroused these evil desires that produced a harvest of sinful deeds resulting in death. He's like, look, over and over, you keep going your own way. Whether you're a younger brother and you just are doing your thing, rebelling, disregarding God, or you're the older brother who has all the law along the way, those rules will never save us because every single one of us, no matter how much we know or don't know, we break them. He says this, but now we have been released. We've been released from the law, for we died to it, and we are no longer captive to its power. Now we've been released from the law, he says, right? For we died to it, and we are no longer captive to its power. We are no longer bound to a list of rules. If you stepped into this, or if somewhere along the way you've wandered into thinking it's just a certain code of conduct or a certain amount of behaviors along the way that keep us connected to God, that is not true. It's a relationship. And certainly in relationships, there are expectations of the way we behave with one another. But the behaviors don't make the relationship demands the behaviors. And we can't get those backwards. We've been released from the law. We died to it, and we are no longer captive to his power. Now he says we can serve God, not in the old way of obeying the law, but in the new way of living in the Spirit. This is the shift that we all need. When we just know what is right and try to do it, or when we know what is wrong and try not to do it, the knowing whether it's right or wrong actually doesn't help us. The Spirit is who we need to help us. God himself in our lives, his strength, his friendship is what we need to actually be able to overcome. And honestly, as deep as this goes, even for some of us who are followers of Jesus, we may even live that way, but what it looks like on the outside when we react to other people who disagree with us is that it's this list, rule, expectation, belief, all the way along the way. And let me just tell you, that's bad news. Because people aren't doing the wrong thing because they set out to do the wrong thing. People aren't coming up short because they desire to come up short. We come up short when we don't trust and rely on Jesus' strength in our lives. We don't live in relationship with him. The one who is against us wins instead of the one who is for us because we let him. We get a choice. This is what we'll talk about next week in Romans 6. We get a choice. Who will we cooperate with? The one who is deceiving us and leading us into ruin, or the one who is for us and inviting us into impact? The one who is inviting us to intimacy and friendship. You see what Romans 7 is, as complicated as it can be and as relatable as it is along the way. Here's the good news. Because of Jesus, we can have friendship with God in the presence of his Spirit, who is stronger than anyone who is against us, who is stronger than the generational pattern in our life, who is stronger than the addiction that we've had a trouble overcoming, who is stronger than the challenge in me and the one I'm in relationship with when we can't get along, the one who is strong enough to parent our children really, really well, the one who will speak a better word into who I am than anyone else ever could by way of a like, an encouragement, an affirmation, or a criticism. And so the invitation always is to step into not knowledge, not a code of conduct, not a list of rules, but into a relationship. And so what we see in Romans 7 is what we've seen every single week. It's this. You are invited to relationship, to friendship, to cooperation, to moment by moment, day after day, everywhere you go, whatever you're facing, kind of cooperation with the God who spoke you into existence, loves you more than you could possibly imagine, overcame your failure and paid for it himself so that by his Spirit, he could live in us and with us and call us together with others alive in him. And so whether you're the younger son who has known nothing of what God expected for you, good news, just stop running. Come home. What you'll find in Luke 15 is what I found alongside these guys, a father waiting at the end of the driveway that the moment you take a step in his direction will run toward you. And when you want to try to beg your way back in, he says, I'll have none of it. Get a robe, get a ring, get some shoes, kill the fatted calf. We're going to have a celebration because now we're together again. Relationship, you hear it? Younger sons, younger daughters, stop running. Doesn't matter what you've known, what you didn't know, what you did, what you didn't do. Do you want friendship with God? If the answer is yes, step and say yes. Invite him in and walk in his direction. But it occurs to me that we actually probably have a lot more older sons and older daughters in the room who somewhere along the line forgot it was about friendship with the Father, not service to him. Not managing things by our behavior or our knowledge, our obedience, our right beliefs, but instead a relationship marked by intimacy. You see, the older son was just as lost as the younger. And what he should have experienced was a rich and vibrant relationship with his father, enjoying life together with him. But man, it only took a glance to realize that's not what was going on. And sadly, too many places that Christians go, we look a lot like an older brother, declaring right beliefs here and right behavior there, expecting people who don't even know the Father to act like he wants them to act. It doesn't even make sense. And all of a sudden, it looks a lot like religion, which is just bad news. Older sons and daughters, we got to find our way back into friendship and relationship, remembering the solution. If the problem is an enemy working against us, the solution is not a list. The solution is a person. In this story in Luke 15, it says the older brother was very angry. You know why he was angry? Because the father threw a party for the derelict son who ran away but found his way back. Do you know why the father threw a party? Because he was back. They can be together again. The older brother was having none of it. He wouldn't even go into the party, and so his father came out. Did you catch that? Younger sons and daughters, the father's waiting at the end of the driveway for you to say yes. Older sons and daughters who have lost sight, maybe this is the father running out after you. He left the party to come after you. He comes after him and he begs him, and he replied, the son replied, all these years, I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me. Do you hear it? Rule, 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 rule. Those Pharisees who didn't like Jesus hanging out with the riffraff thinking their rules all the way along the way is what kept him in a relationship, but rules don't make a relationship. Yes, relationships demand rules and agreements along the way, but rules do not make one. He throws a fit. He says, yeah, when this son of yours comes back, he won't even call him his brother. When this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf. You can hear the bitterness. The older brother seemed to think that if he just did all the right things, things would go well. Some of us have forgotten it's not just about doing the right things, thinking the right things, standing in the right places, declaring the right things. It's about intimacy with the Father. It's about relationship. Imagine this father whose son finally comes home and has this expectation of, now me and my sons can love life together again, and bitter older brother wanders off and the family's broken again. And so the father pursues, and look what he says. He says, his father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. He just wants life with the best thing for you. Older sons, older daughters, younger sons, younger daughters, and God's deepest desire is life with. This is the good news. That if our problem is an enemy, the solution is a friend. When we live by laws or rules, we're always in pass or fail mode. If you find yourself feeling like a pass or a fail, you've missed it. Because when we live by the Spirit, we don't pass or fail, we learn and grow. When we live by the law, we find ourselves feeling like we either are, which fills us full of pride, or we aren't, which fills us full of shame. But when we live by the Spirit, we actually become, we develop, we emerge, we're in process. We want to be people who live by the Spirit. When we live by the law or a code of conduct, religion, or a list of rules, we are bound to judge not only ourselves, but others. And the moment the finger waving starts, we've come off track. We are older brothers quickly. But when we live by the Spirit, we are not bound to judge or condemn. We are bound to connect and to celebrate, because it's together walking in His direction. Next week, we'll talk about how this dying to the old way calls us to life in the Spirit. But this week, let's be people who live by the Spirit. We are invited to nothing less than friendship with God. So be a friend with Him. Not a servant, not a slave, not an earner, but a friend, enjoying time. Think about what you do with your friends. Do that in any way that makes sense to you with God. Get alone with them. Have one-to-one time. Have conversation. Tell Him what matters to you. Look in and find out what matters to Him. Put yourself in place where other people who enjoy Him, we get to be together as a group of friends. And those of us who are following in the direction of Jesus, let's stop spreading religion and begin spreading good news. Stop showing up with a code of conduct and invite people in to friendship, marked by empathy and listening. All the way along the way, not only does God show up as a friend, but He invites us to show up that way in others. Be kind. Be the kind of friend who shows up in life as good news with good news, because we have the greatest friend who is nothing but good news. So listen, yeah, the struggle's real. It's so real. It's not just you, it's all of us. And it's not just you, you have one working against you, but good news. The solution is a friend who steps in and who is strong. So while it doesn't sound like good news, the struggle is real. We gotta be honest, but good news, it's not just us, and the solution is a friendship. This is what Jesus invites us into, so let's enjoy Him this week. Listen, if we can support you in any way, we would love to. Head over to canyonridge.org. You'll find everything you need, as well as a way to reach out to us. Don't forget to share this with a friend, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you soon.